Long ago, under the pale light of the full moon, a young woman ran through the forest, her cries lost in the wind. The trees stood tall and still, as though watching, but offering no help. Behind her, a dark figure followed, its breath heavy and foul. Her white garment was torn, streaked with mud and blood. No one in the village heard her voice that night, though her soul screamed for justice. By morning, her body was found near the river, eyes wide open, staring into the heavens. The village elders said nothing. They buried her quickly, claiming it was the gods' punishment. The moon turned red that night. Some say it was the girl's spirit crying. Others whispered that a curse had been born, a curse that would haunt the daughters of the village under every full moon. From that day on, any maiden who dared to step outside at night when the moon was full vanished. They called it the cursed moon. The village of Umuochi lay between two large hills, hidden from the outside world. The land was green, the soil fertile, and the people hard-working. But beneath the beauty, a terrible silence lingered, one that no one dared to break. 16-year-old Adana walked barefoot along the narrow path that led to her family's hut. She carried a large calabash of water on her head, steady and sure, as the late afternoon sun burned her dark skin. Her eyes, large and bright, scanned the path ahead. Adana, her younger brother, Ikenna, called, running toward her. He was only 10, thin but full of energy. "Mama said you should hurry. The sun is going down." Adana frowned but quickened her pace. Everyone knew not to stay outside after dark, especially on the nights when the full moon began to rise. Though the last disappearance had happened many years ago, the fear never left the village. As they reached their hut, Adana handed the water to her mother, Mama Nkechi, who was pounding yam for dinner. "You're late, Adana," Mama Nkechi said sharply, though her voice held worry more than anger. "Sorry, Mama, Ikenna ran off again." Her mother sighed. "You know how dangerous it is when night comes." She lowered her voice. "The moon will be full soon." Adana said nothing. She turned to help her mother prepare the evening meal. Around them, the sound of pounding mortar and laughter from other huts filled the air. The village seemed peaceful, yet every family's voice dropped lower as the sun dipped behind the hills. Soon, a strange quiet settled over the village, broken only by the occasional cry of a bird. That night, the village was swallowed by darkness, save for the pale glow of the full moon rising above the hills. The soft chirping of crickets and the distant hoot of owls echoed through the land, but inside each hut, families huddled together. Doors were shut, fires dimmed. Adana lay beside her brother, Ikenna, on the mat. Though he had fallen fast asleep, she could not close her eyes. The moonlight streamed through the small cracks in the thatched roof, casting strange shapes on the mud walls. Her mother's words played in her mind. "The moon will be full soon." Outside, a sound broke the silence. A faint rustle, as if someone or something was moving near their hut. Adana's heartbeat quickened. She sat up and listened closely. "Who's there?" she whispered. At first, there was no answer. Then it came again, a dragging sound, like footsteps in the dry grass. Adana's hands trembled as she reached for her brother. "Ikenna!" she hissed. Ikenna stirred. "What?" he mumbled. "Listen." But the sound had stopped. The night was silent again. Adana's chest rose and fell quickly. Maybe it was just an animal. She lay back down, but sleep would not come. As the hours passed, the moon climbed higher, shining brighter. Suddenly, a soft, eerie cry drifted through the air. It sounded far away, but it was unmistakable. Someone was crying. Adana shot up again, her eyes wide. "Mama!" she called. Her mother, who had been dozing in the corner of the hut, sat up immediately. "Adana, what is it?" "Did you hear that?" Mama Nkechi's face hardened. She listened for a moment, but the sound had disappeared. "Stop talking nonsense," she said sharply. "Go back to sleep." "But Mama, someone—" "Enough!" Mama Nkechi's voice shook with fear, though she tried to hide it. She stood, walked to the door, and bolted it tightly. "No one goes outside tonight. You hear me?" "Yes, Mama," Adana said quietly. Mama Nkechi lay back down, but Adana could see her mother's eyes open, staring into the dark. For the rest of the night, Adana stayed awake, her ears tuned to every sound. She didn't know why, but a strange feeling had settled in her chest, like something was watching them. The next day, the village buzzed with hushed conversation. Something had happened during the night. Adana heard whispers as she fetched water from the stream. They found her near the forest, one woman said. She shouldn't have been outside, another replied. Adana froze. Who are they talking about? She asked an older girl nearby. The girl looked around nervously before leaning closer. It's Neka, the blacksmith's daughter. She disappeared last night. Adana's heart dropped. Neka was a kind, soft-spoken girl, only a year older than her. How did it happen? Adana whispered. They don't know. Her father said he heard her scream, but when he ran outside, she was gone. Adana felt sick. The curse was real, and it was happening again. She remembered the crying she'd heard the night before. Could it have been Neka? That evening, the village elders gathered at the square. They stood tall and grim, their white robes glowing under the moonlight. The oldest elder, Papa Ozo, raised his staff. People of Umuochi, he said, his voice deep and stern, the gods have spoken. The curse has awakened again because our daughters have angered the spirits. The crowd murmured in fear. Papa Ozo continued, From now on, no girl shall leave her home after sunset. If the gods are not appeased, worse things will happen. Adana looked around at the frightened faces. The village accepted the elders' words without question, but something inside her felt uneasy. Why do the gods punish only the girls? She thought. Her mother grabbed her arm. Adana, don't look around. Bow your head. But Adana couldn't help it. Her eyes landed on Neka's father, who knelt at the edge of the crowd, weeping. That night, Adana lay in bed thinking about Neka. She remembered her laughter and kindness. It didn't make sense. Why would the spirits hurt someone like her? Suddenly, a decision formed in Adana's heart. I won't stay silent, she whispered to herself. I will find out the truth. The next morning, Adana told Ikenna her plan as they fetched water. I'm going to the forest tonight, she said. What? Ikenna stared at her. Are you mad? Mama will kill you. I don't care. Something is not right, Ikenna. Neka didn't deserve what happened to her. I want to know the truth. But the spirits. What if it's not spirits? Adana cut him off. What if it's something else? What if someone is using the curse to hide their evil deeds? Ikenna's eyes widened. But what can we do? You'll cover for me. If Mama asks, say I'm sleeping. I'll go after she falls asleep. Ikenna swallowed hard but nodded. Be careful, Adana. That night, as the full moon rose, Adana waited for her mother to fall asleep. When the hut was silent, she slipped out into the night, clutching a small lantern. The air was cold, and the village felt like a ghost town. Adana's footsteps were soft as she walked toward the forest. Every sound made her jump, a cricket chirping, the rustling of leaves, but she forced herself to keep going. As she neared the edge of the forest, she saw something that stopped her heart. Footprints. Fresh footprints in the dirt, leading into the trees. Adana's hands shook as she followed them. The forest was darker than she imagined, the trees towering over her like silent giants. The light from her lantern flickered. Suddenly, she heard it, the soft crying sound again. Her blood ran cold. Who's there? She called softly. The crying stopped. Adana turned around, but the forest was empty. Then, behind her, a twig snapped. She spun around and raised her lantern. The light fell on a shadowy figure standing a few feet away. Adana screamed. Adana froze. Her heart pounded in her chest as the shadow moved closer. The faint glow of her lantern revealed the figure, a man. His face was partly hidden under a hood, but his presence sent chills down her spine. Who are you? Adana stammered, her voice trembling. The man didn't speak. He simply stood there, silent and unmoving like a statue. Then he took a step toward her. Adana stumbled back, clutching the lantern tightly. Stay away! Still, the man said nothing. Suddenly, he raised his hand, and Adana noticed something gleaming, a sharp blade. Fear took hold of her legs, and without thinking, she turned and ran. Branches whipped at her face, and her bare feet pounded against the hard ground. The lantern fell from her grip, shattering and plunging the forest into complete darkness. Behind her, the man's heavy footsteps gave chase. Adana could hear his breathing, close, too close. She didn't dare look back. Run! Run! Don't stop! Her chest burned, and tears streamed down her cheeks, but she kept going. Suddenly, her foot caught on a root, and she fell hard to the ground. Pain shot through her ankle. She tried to stand, but the pain was too much. The footsteps stopped. Adana's breath hitched as she turned her head. The man was there, standing just a few feet away, his hood still shadowing his face. Please, Adana whimpered. Don't hurt me. The man tilted his head, as though studying her. Then, without a word, he turned and disappeared into the darkness. Adana lay there, gasping for breath, unable to believe what had just happened. Why had he let her go? Who was he? When she finally gathered enough strength, she limped back to the village, her mind spinning with questions. Adana barely slept that night. Her mother noticed her limping the next morning. "What happened to you?" Mama Nkechi asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. "I tripped on the way to the stream," Adana lied, avoiding her mother's eyes. Mama Nkechi scowled but didn't press further. That afternoon, Adana went to Neka's family hut. She found Neka's father, the blacksmith, sitting alone, his face buried in his hands. "Papa Chike?" Adana said softly. The man looked up, his eyes red and hollow. "What do you want, Adana?" "I need to know about Neka," Adana said. "I heard her crying that night. I want to find out what happened to her." Papa Chike's face hardened. "You must forget about it. It's the curse, nothing more." "But what if it's not the curse?" Adana pressed. "What if someone—" She paused, afraid to say it. "What if someone is doing this to the girls?" Papa Chike stared at her for a long moment, then whispered, "Go home, child. You don't understand the darkness you are walking into." He turned away, refusing to speak any further. Adana's frustration grew. No one wanted to talk. No one wanted to question the curse. But she had seen the man in the forest. He was real. She decided to visit the oldest woman in the village, Mama Ejima, who lived on the outskirts. People said she was mad, but Adana had heard whispers that Mama Ejima knew things others didn't. When Adana arrived, the old woman was sitting outside her hut, humming to herself. Her wrinkled face broke into a crooked smile when she saw Adana. "Ah, the brave one," Mama Ejima said, her voice raspy. "What brings you to an old woman's hut?" Adana hesitated. "I need answers, Mama, about the curse, about Neka." Mama Ejima's smile faded. She stared at Adana for a long time, as though deciding whether to speak. Finally, she said, "Sit down, child. There is much you do not know." Adana sat on the ground, her heart pounding. "The curse of the moon is not from the gods," Mama Ejima said softly. "It is the work of men, wicked men who hide their evil deeds behind the name of the spirits." Adana gasped. "What do you mean?" Mama Ejima's eyes darkened. "Many years ago, a girl like you was taken. She was strong like you, and she fought back. But the men who took her were powerful. They silenced her, and when she died, they blamed it on a curse. Since then, they have used the same lie to take other girls." Adana felt sick. "Who are they?" Mama Ejima shook her head. "I cannot say. They will kill me if I do. But you must look closely, child. The answer is in the village. The ones who act righteous, the ones who speak of the gods, watch them carefully." Adana's mind raced. The elders. Papa Ozo. Could they be part of this? As she stood to leave, Mama Ejima grabbed her hand. "Be careful, Adana. They will come for you if they know you are searching for the truth." Over the next few days, Adana began to watch the village elders closely. She noticed strange things. Papa Ozo often disappeared into the forest at night. Another elder, Uncle Nwosu, avoided her gaze whenever she walked by. One evening, Adana followed Papa Ozo as he left the village under the cover of darkness. She kept her distance, her heart pounding with every step. He entered the same forest where she had seen the hooded man. Adana hid behind a tree and watched as Papa Ozo knelt on the ground. He was speaking in a low voice, but she couldn't hear the words. Then, from the shadows, the hooded man appeared. Adana's blood ran cold. Papa Ozo knows him. She strained to hear their conversation. "The girl in the forest escaped," the hooded man said. Papa Ozo cursed under his breath. "We must find her before she speaks. If the village knows the truth, we are finished." Adana's eyes widened. The elders were behind everything. They had been taking the girls, blaming it on the curse to hide their crimes. Suddenly, a twig snapped under her foot. Papa Ozo turned sharply. "Who's there?" Adana bolted, running through the trees as fast as her legs could carry her. She could hear shouts behind her. The elders knew she had seen them. Adana burst into the village square, screaming, "Everyone, wake up! Wake up!" Villagers poured out of their huts, confused and angry. Papa Ozo and the other elders arrived moments later, their faces dark with rage. "What is the meaning of this?" Papa Ozo thundered. Adana pointed at him. "You are a liar. You and the others are behind the curse. You take the girls and hide behind the spirits to cover your evil." The crowd gasped. "Silence her!" Papa Ozo shouted at once, but the villagers stepped back. "I saw him in the forest," Adana cried. "I heard him speak to the man who took Neka." The villagers began murmuring, their fear turning to anger. Neka's father stepped forward, his face twisted with grief. "Is this true?" Other families began to shout, demanding answers. Papa Ozo's face turned pale. He tried to speak, but the crowd was closing in. The truth could no longer be hidden. By morning, the village elders had been taken away, their dark deeds exposed. Adana stood at the riverbank, the sun rising over the hills. The village was free, but the scars would remain. She had survived, and her voice had broken the silence. As the first light touched the water, Adana whispered, "For Neka, for all of them."